I woke up this morning to the sound of waves crashing against the jagged cliffs on the eastern side of my property, and for a split second, I forgot that the fate of global economics was being decided right down the hallway past my kitchen. When you buy an island out in the middle of nowhere, you think you are buying privacy and a nice place to get a tan without anyone bothering you. But then you realize that the exact same things that make an island perfect for hiding from your problems also make it perfect for world leaders who need to hide from the entire planet. See, the news anchors on television like to talk about these big international summits in shiny convention centers with bulletproof glass and thousands of police officers lining the streets. But the real handshakes and the actual deals that change the map happen right here on my deck while someone is wearing flip-flops and complaining that the grilled shrimp has too much pepper on it. This place is not just a bunch of fancy villas and a nice beach where you can see the fish swimming around your ankles. It is a giant chessboard where the players are running actual countries, and I am basically the guy who has to make sure nobody flips the board over when they start losing. Managing a spot like this means you have to be part hotel manager, part secret agent, and part principal of a school where every single student has a nuclear football sitting right next to their beach towel. You would think that when the most powerful people on Earth get together, they would act like dignified adults who have everything completely figured out. But the moment they step off their private helicopters and look around at the ocean, they turn into regular folks who get cranky if their room does not have the specific brand of sparkling water they like. The logistics alone are enough to make your brain melt into a puddle because you cannot just go down to the local supermarket to grab extra napkins when the Prime Minister of a major European country decides to bring an extra 12 bodyguards who all look like they could bend a crowbar with their bare hands. Every single piece of food, every single clean sheet, and every single drop of fuel for the generators has to be brought in on cargo boats weeks in advance, and every single box has to be scanned by 3 different security teams who act like a head of lettuce might be a secret listening device from a rival intelligence agency. I remember last year we had a huge storm coming in from the south right when a major peace talk was supposed to start, and the radar was showing waves higher than a 2-story house, which meant our supply boat was stuck at a dock 300 miles away with all the fancy cheese and top-shelf steaks. I had to look a guy who commands an army of 2 million soldiers dead in the eye and tell him that for dinner, he was going to be eating regular boxed macaroni and cheese with hot dogs sliced up inside it, because that was literally all we had left in the deep pantry. The funny thing is, he absolutely loved it and asked his personal chef to get the recipe from me, which just goes to show that underneath all the expensive suits and the medals, everyone just wants something warm and cheesy when the rain is pouring down outside. That is the kind of stuff they never print in the history books or show on the evening news broadcasts because people want to believe that global politics is this grand, mysterious dance executed by geniuses, rather than a bunch of tired people arguing about boundaries while eating comfort food in their socks. Security on the island is a whole different level of crazy because it is not just about putting up a tall fence or having a few guys with flashlights walking around the perimeter at night. The water surrounding us is constantly patrolled by stealth boats that do not even show up on normal navigation systems, and if you look closely at the coral reefs through a pair of goggles, you will see little cameras and sensors that can detect the heartbeat of a swimmer from a mile away. There are satellites orbiting up in space that have their lenses locked directly onto my roof, meaning if I drop a coin on the patio, some guy sitting in a dark basement in Virginia can probably tell you whether it landed on heads or tails before I can even bend down to pick it up. The guests themselves bring so much baggage, and I do not mean suitcases full of clothes, that the air traffic control over our tiny dirt runway looks like a video game on the hardest difficulty level. You have to coordinate the arrival times down to the exact second because if 2 leaders who currently hate each other happen to park their airplanes next to each other on the tarmac, it causes a giant diplomatic nightmare before they even get to the check-in desk. One time we had a slight delay with a fuel pump, and the president of a superpower had to sit in his plane on the runway for 10 minutes, while his main rival was walking down the steps of another plane right in front of him, and the look of pure annoyance on his face through the cockpit window was enough to make the air conditioning feel like it froze over. Once everyone is safely inside their assigned villas, the real challenge begins, because keeping the peace means keeping people separated until they are absolutely ready to be nice to each other. The layout of the island was designed by a genius architect who understood that sometimes the best way to prevent a war is to make sure two people do not have to share a hallway when they are heading to the bathroom in the middle of the night. Each villa is like its own miniature kingdom, complete with its own kitchen, its own swimming pool, and its own completely separate internet connection that is scrambled so heavily that even the smartest hackers in the world could not peek at what they are typing. My job during the first 24 hours of a summit is basically just moving around the property like a ghost, checking the temperature of the water, making sure the curtains are thick enough to block out the morning sun, and ensuring that no two leaders accidentally bump into each other while they are walking around in their bathrobes. You have to know the weird little quirks of every single leader, like who cannot sleep unless the room is exactly 62 degrees, who refuses to look at the color purple because they think it brings bad luck, and who needs a fresh pot of coffee delivered to their door every hour on the dot, even if it is 3 o'clock in the morning. If you mess up one tiny detail, like giving someone a blue pen instead of a black pen to sign a treaty, it can put them in a bad mood for the rest of the day, and a bad mood can mean the difference between a trade agreement getting signed or a bunch of factories closing down on the other side of the world. The dining room is where the real drama unfolds, and setting the seating chart for the main dinner is like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube where the stickers keep changing colors while you are holding it. You cannot put two people who are currently having a border dispute next to each other because they will just spend the whole night staring at their plates and making passive-aggressive comments about the soup. But you also cannot put them too far apart because then it looks like you are taking sides and causing an insult. I have a giant board in my office with little magnets representing each country, and I spend days moving them around, trying to find the perfect balance where everyone feels respected, but nobody is close enough to throw a fork at anyone else. The waitstaff we hire are all professionals who have signed non-disclosure agreements so long they look like phone books, and they are trained to move completely silently, clearing dishes without ever making a sound or interrupting a conversation. They have to be completely invisible because when a president is whispering to a chancellor about a secret currency deal, the last thing they need is a guy named Kevin interrupting to ask if anyone wants more garlic bread. I stand near the kitchen doors, just watching the room through a little glass window, watching the body language, noticing when a shoulder gets tense or when someone takes a sudden sip of wine, because those little movements tell you exactly how the secret negotiations are going long before any official announcement is made to the public. What people do not realize is that the most important conversations never happen at the big round table with the flags and the microphones. They happen during the late-night walks along the shore when everyone else has gone to bed and the security guards are staying back in the shadows. There is something about the sound of the ocean and the fact that you are standing on a tiny piece of rock in the middle of the giant blue sea that makes all the titles and the power seem a little less important for a moment. I have seen two men who control the largest nuclear stockpiles in human history standing on the sand with their pant legs rolled up, throwing small pebbles into the water and talking about their grandkids just like regular neighbors over a backyard fence. In those quiet moments, away from the reporters and the advisors who are constantly whispering in their ears, they can finally just say what they actually mean without worrying about how it will look on social media or what the newspapers will say the next morning. My role in those moments is just to make sure the beach path is clear of sharp shells and that there is a cooler filled with decent drinks waiting for them at the end of the point. Because sometimes a global crisis can be solved just by letting two exhausted people sit on a wooden bench and watch the stars until the sun starts coming up over the horizon. Of course, it is not always peaceful, and there are times when the tension on this island gets so thick you could cut it with a steak knife. I remember a specific afternoon when a set of secret economic numbers got leaked to the press ahead of schedule, and suddenly the entire vibe of the resort shifted from a relaxed beach holiday to a high-stakes standoff. Leaders were marching back and forth between their villas, their advisors were shouting into secure satellite phones, and you could hear the constant whirring of the encryption machines working overtime in the communications tent. One prime minister got so angry he stormed out of a meeting, walked right down to the dock, and demanded that his pilot warm up the helicopter so he could leave immediately, even though the final statement had not been finished. I had to run down to the water, use every single bit of politeness I had in my body, and convince him to stay just long enough to try a slice of our chef's famous key lime pie, which sounds completely ridiculous. But it worked because it gave him a polite excuse to calm down without looking like he was backing down to his rivals. That pie literally saved a 3-year diplomatic effort from falling completely apart, and the chef still keeps a framed letter of appreciation from that country's government hanging right above the stove in the kitchen. When the summit finally ends and the helicopters start lifting off one by one, leaving nothing but the smell of aviation fuel and the quiet sound of the wind in the palm trees, the transition is almost jarring. You go from having the most powerful people on the planet breathing your air and eating your food, to being completely alone with a mountain of dirty laundry and a resort that looks like a giant hurricane swept through it. My staff and I walk through the empty rooms, collecting the discarded notes, making sure all the secure documents were properly shredded in the high-heat incinerator, and finding the weird things people leave behind, like an expensive pair of sunglasses or a lucky coin hidden under a mattress. It takes us a full week just to wash all the linens, patch up the grass where the heavy equipment tore up the lawn, and reset the security codes so the island goes back to being just a pretty place in the ocean. But even when it is quiet, and it is just me sitting on the porch watching the sun go down, I can look at the chair next to me and know that the future of the world was shaped right there by someone who was just trying to get a break from the noise of the world. That is only the first half of what goes down on this rock, because once the summer sessions end, the winter meetings bring an entirely different set of challenges that make the warm weather look like a walk in the park. The winter brings heavy fog and rough northern currents that flip the security strategy on its head, turning our open water paradise into a locked-down fortress where visibility drops to almost zero. When the weather gets bad, the leaders cannot just wander around the beach or sit outside by the pool, which means they are trapped inside the main lodge together for days on end. And that is when cabin fever starts setting in. Imagine putting the people who run the world's largest economies into a room together with a fire going, a bunch of board games, and no way to get away from each other's voices for 48 hours straight. That is exactly where the real story gets interesting, and that is what we are going to dive into right now for the second half of this crazy journey behind the scenes of the most exclusive island on Earth.